Roll 'em.
So today we're going to talk about what drives respondent survey enjoyment, which is a huge topic. It's been a huge topic in the industry for a long time. For a while, the research industry was blaming the respondent a lot. They were saying, oh, you're straight lining, you're doing this, you're speeding through surveys. And my contention has been all along that we're doing that to them because we're giving them long surveys, we're giving them boring surveys, we're giving them things that they don't want to do. So we've created some of the problems. So we need to take some of the responsibility for the behavior that we're getting from our panelists. So several years ago, I actually placed, it was a series of survey satisfaction questions, and they were added to all surveys for a key client, a very large client in Cincinnati. I'll let you guys guess who that might be. Data is available on 143 studies, so it was a lot of studies, and I think this was only like a 6-month period, so it's a client that we do a lot of work for, and it was over 200,000 responses, so we had a lot of data. And the other thing we did, as well as ask satisfaction, is we also included some information about the actual questionnaire. So we had things like actual and estimated length, grids, which grids are the questions where you have all the stuff running across the top and things down the side, and you have to do multiple questions. They're one of the respondents' favorites. Number of open ends, study type, drop-off, and completion rate. So we had a lot of information about what the questionnaires were like so we could figure out, okay, what drives survey satisfaction. Now, one of the key questions we asked was about overall enjoyment. So overall, how enjoyable was the survey you just completed? Very enjoyable, somewhat, not very, or not at all. So what percent do you guys think actually said they found the survey very enjoyable? And keep in mind, this is among people from our panel who have agreed to do research, so that could affect their enjoyment level. So it's not like we're calling people at random. Any guesses? Very enjoyable? 50%? 15? Any other guesses?
Somebody said 0.
Somebody said 0. Some days I wonder about some of our surveys, and I would give it a 0. It was actually 37%, so a little over a third said it was very enjoyable, and another 50% do say somewhat enjoyable. So there's not a lot at that end, but when you start looking at the number of respondents, that's what starts becoming concerning. So we have over 2,600 respondents saying not at all enjoyable. So if we lose these people from our panel because of these bad surveys, we have to go recruit another 2,600 people. That's not an easy task. So anything we can do to get people out of those bottom 2 points is a good thing for us. I want to talk a little bit about what actually less enjoyable surveys lead to. And it does lead to survey dropout. By dropout, I mean people start the survey, they qualify, they get into it, and they go, oh, this survey is awful, it's too long, it's boring, I'm stopping, so they drop out, so they're incomplete. So less enjoyable surveys do lead to the higher dropout rates. The other thing it leads to, at least for us, is higher panel recruitment costs, because if we're losing panelists, we're losing them off our panel a lot of times too. So we're actually having to replace them, so it increases our cost, which goes to the panelist attrition as well. So all this kind of goes together and is why it's so important to try to improve the surveys. Here's some data just to show that less enjoyable surveys do have higher dropout rates. You'll see the very enjoyable, only 5% dropout, versus the not at all enjoyable, it goes up to 6.5%. And it's not a huge increase, but you will see dropout rates for certain surveys that are much higher than that. You'll see them in the double digits. And when you start getting into that double digit area, it can start affecting your data. You have biased data then because you're losing people. A lot of times you're losing the people who are probably less engaged in the category. So you're getting the people that are more positive, so that skews all your data more positive. Another thing we've looked at is their first experience on our panel. So when they have a negative first experience, so the first survey they take, they drop out of, 38% of them are likely to become inactive then, so they never take a second survey. And that's not the case with some of the other things that they experience, so the completes and the screen-outs and the quota-fulls. So definitely that bad survey experience leads to them not even becoming engaged in our panel. And when you think about it, if we only get one survey out of somebody and we're paying several dollars to recruit them, we're not getting our money back from them. And then the other thing we've looked at is when somebody becomes inactive, so they've been on the panel for a certain period of time, and we look at their last 3 actions to see what happens then. And what we've seen is that when they become inactive, their last 3 actions, they're more likely to have dropped out of a survey, and they're more likely to have taken a longer survey. So you'll see the average completion time, 28 minutes for the people who became inactive versus only 23 minutes for those who are still active on the panel. So definitely, survey has a huge bearing on our ability to keep panelists and keep them engaged and get good survey data too. It's not just keeping them engaged, you don't get good survey data. So is there any questions before I move to the next section? Anyone not following? I don't know how much you guys have gotten into some of the marketing research speak. How's that?
Can you go back a couple slides to where you had the quotas and everything like that? There we go, that one. Yeah. So, a negative first survey experience after joining the panel is more likely to lead to inactivity.
So they never have a second. That's the percent who never go and take a second survey. So their first experience is so bad that they end up not taking another survey.
So your base on this one is all people who didn't take a second survey?
It was actually all people who joined in a certain time frame.
Okay.
So the total would be the total 14,000 who joined, and in total 18% never took a second survey.
Okay.
But if you dropped out of your first survey, 38% never became active and took a second survey.
Okay. Okay. So that stuff that I don't know if you recognize that stuff, but we've talked about all of those things. Okay. You understand the definitions there of what a complete is. What is a screen out?
They didn't qualify.
They didn't qualify. Good. Good. Dropout is, as it implies, they didn't do the whole survey. Quota full? Give me an example of that.
Like if they were looking for 500 respondents and they were number 501.
Okay. Looking for 500 respondents and they were 501. Sure. Or it could be
they're
a
looking for a
subgroup.
specific subgroup, yeah, like a certain age group, a certain gender, and that quota's full.
Yep. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff on there that definitely corresponds to things that they know the speak.
Good.
At least they've heard it once, but maybe hearing it from you, hearing it a few times usually reinforces it.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? No? Do you need a pause, or are you good on that?
I think I'm good. We're at 7.5 minutes. We're okay.
Okay, so now I have another question for you guys. So I've talked a little bit. I've probably given away a couple things. So what do you think makes a questionnaire more or less enjoyable?
I think when there's like an unmet expectation, like I've gone into surveys thinking it's only going to take like 5 minutes, and then once it's like 10 or 15, then that's when like I'll stop.
Yeah.
Like I won't finish.
Yeah, setting inappropriate expectations up front, never a good idea. Other things? They're shy there.
If you put like all of your questions at once on the first page, it's kind of overwhelming, and you don't really want to take the initiative to go through them.
Yeah, we usually only put one per page, and every once in a while I'll see questionnaires that don't do that, but most marketing research companies will probably do one question per page, or at least make sure that you don't have to scroll. Like sometimes I'll put age and gender on the same screen because you don't have to scroll down, but when you have to start scrolling either left to right or down, never a good idea. That's too much for them. It's more, when you think about it, it's more actions they need to take, so you need to try to minimize the amount of mouse movement they need to make on a page. You had one too?
I was just going to say, I don't like when there's a lot of open-ended questions. Like I don't want to take a survey and be typing a novel the entire time.
And you know, open-ends can be really funny. Sometimes people like the open-ends. I think it depends how many you use and where they're at in the survey. Like the one that's which isn't technically an open-end, the one that turns me off is when you start asking me to type in what brands I'm aware of right away in the survey. Huge turn off for me, and I usually end up stopping the survey because I'm like, I'm not going to name all these brands because a lot of times, because I'm in research, I know 30 brands in a category, so I'm definitely not typing in 30 brands. So I feel like I'm not going to waste my time doing this. So that's anytime the open end. Sometimes people like having open ends, especially if they haven't felt like they've been able to express their opinion, but I think you need to make sure you're not doing open end after open end after open end.
To that point, Susan, we talked in here about looking at aided versus unaided awareness, and clearly that's important, that brands want to know if they're top of mind, and the way to do that is often through unaided. So So do you have a suggestion, like in your case, would it be instead of all the brands that you can think of, would it just be what are the main brands that first come to mind? Would that be a better way to word that questionnaire?
Maybe like the top 3 or something.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a category that doesn't have a ton of brands, not as big of a deal. But when you think of like hair care shampoo or laundry detergent doesn't have a ton. It depends how specific you get. I mean, some of these have a ton of brands, and it takes a lot to go through the list and figure out what ones you're aware of. So it might be better to name a few, because then you're probably getting what's in their shower. If it's a shampoo, you're getting what they're using. You are getting the one that's going to come to them top of mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's better ways to word questions. Other things people can think of? Yes?
I hate when they ask, like, 30 to 50 questions in a row, like, how likely are you to agree, very strongly, very dislikely. It's just really annoying because you just get confused when you're filling out the survey. Like, there needs to be a break, there needs to be a better flow.
Yep. And we've looked at some different ways of asking some of those questions where you show things more one at a time rather than the big, huge grid and try to break things up. So there are ways to make those type of questions more engaging too. Anything else? No? Well, I will start going through then some of the ones that we've come across. Definitely shorter questionnaires, much more enjoyable. So when we looked at the data, people who said it was very enjoyable, the average was 23.7 minutes versus when they said not at all enjoyable, it was 35 minutes. And honestly, even I think the 23.7 is too long because I've done other research on research that's shown that probably the sweet spot is 20 minutes. And actually, it may be lower than that now because I think as the internet changes, people are less intrigued with taking surveys online, so they may not be as likely to do surveys when you're making them too long. So definitely, I always try to keep surveys under 20 minutes. The other thing is, more enjoyable surveys aren't repetitious, and there's a lot of different ways for surveys to be repetitious, and what we did is I pulled some open-ended comments, which I think really brings this to light. If we said we only use one brand, then eliminate the next question that asks which brands do we use most often. So a lot of times you ask, what brands have you used in the past 12 months? Then you want to know which brand you used most often. And a lot of times if they only say one, you're not carrying over their answer. And you could. There's a lot of programming options where you can carry answers over, force answers. The other thing you can do, actually make this question better too, is if you have a long brand list, I've seen some that if you get down to very specific variants, like Tide with bleach in a certain scent, your list can be 100 brands long. So once they choose everything that they've used in the past 12 months, in the most often question, you can just show what they said in the previous question. So there's a lot you can do technology-wise that'll make a survey better. And respondents realize this too. They're not dumb. They know that you can do things that will make the survey better. They're online all the time. They know how things work. I hate the multiple tables and grids. I think we've talked about that a few times. They just feel those are very repetitious, very tedious. Not ask the same question over and over and over and over. Once is plenty. My answers do not change. And some researchers, I think probably more academics than marketing researchers, are sometimes taught to ask things multiple ways. So you're getting multiple measures and then you're kind of melding the results together. But respondents hate when you do that because they're like, what's the difference between this and this? It's like, I don't see the difference. It feels like the same question. So you want to try to write the question the best way you can and just ask it once rather than trying to ask it multiple ways. It's boring to answer the same question over and over just about different products, so we do often do that. We might ask, like an equity study, ask about multiple brands, and they have to check all the attributes that apply to every brand, and it can become quite tedious. You ask the same question in 1,000 different ways, and I don't have the time for it. It drove me nuts. So our panelists are pretty open and honest. Store our basic information in our files. Some surveys always begin by asking state, city, age, etc., info that should already be known. And as a panel company, we do have a lot of data already available on our panelists. And we're trying to figure out ways to better utilize that data and to make sure it's up to date, because that's the other thing. Like age, that's obviously not going to change, but information like income, income can change pretty regularly, so you have to try to make sure you have the most up-to-date information if you want them to use your panel data rather than asking the questions. Can you pause?
Sure.